In this video, I'll introduce some block crayon drawing techniques that you might use with your second grade class. A quick point of note that teaching these techniques in this way is not something that I would necessarily do with a second grade class. It's helpful for you as a teacher as you're learning to work and develop your skills. But with my class, I would really bring these techniques only when we're working on a guided drawing. I might bring them in and explain exactly what I'm doing, but not to be doing them as exercises abstractly the way that we'll be doing them in this video. But for those of you who are new to block crayon drawing or looking to expand your ability, then I hope this is a useful resource for you. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the materials. The first thing I'll talk about is the paper. When you're drawing with a block crayon, in a way you're also doing a rubbing of whatever is behind the paper that you're working on. And so if you're working with a single sheet of paper on a desk or even a really smooth table, you'll often get a good amount of texture when you're working with block crayons. Working in a main lesson book or a drawing block or with a stack of paper is one way to really do it. If you are working with single sheets of paper, another way that can really be helpful is to make a drawing pad by folding a sheet of newsprint in half and taping the edges, or taking a couple of sheets of heavier weight drawing paper and taping those together. And that can go underneath your paper and it will get rid of any texture that you want. It'll allow you to get a really nice, smooth background. So once the paper is in place or you're working on a book, the next thing is with crayons. Now, the crayons really do have three sides, all of which are great to use in different areas. The smallest side is great for being able to create some form, the largest side for really shading areas, and the middle side for, of course, everything in between. Another point is that most block crayon sets will come with these crayon sharpeners. They can be something that I don't always have my second graders keep. They do tend to start carving into their crayons and things, which I find to be a little bit wasteful, but they can be really helpful as the crayons get more used and rounded. It makes it harder to use some of the techniques that I'll be showing you. And so particularly this edge of the sharpener being used to sharpen a block crayon can really be helpful. Do it over a trash can. It does make a bit of a mess, and getting beeswax all over your floor isn't always what you want to clean up. But getting a nice clean edge, these are also really great, especially the yellow block crayons tend to get really dirty. And when they have all of those other colors mixed in, it's hard to get a pure color. And so I do frequently use the crayon sharpeners and cleaners, just using a clean edge to scrape off some of those extra pieces. Especially for your more particular students, or maybe you have someone who's a little melancholic, that can be a real assurance for them to have a crayon that really gives them the color that they want. So let's work with a few techniques. When you're holding your block crayons, I find it helpful to hold it with either my thumb on the top pushing down or occasionally with two fingers pushing down. And the first thing to really work at is getting a nice, smooth layer of color. And so with any side, working at creating these bands of color that really don't have a strong edge, either at the top or bottom, or at either side where you're starting and finishing. So you really want to start that stroke before it comes on the paper and kind of picking up as you go, letting them overlap and really keeping a nice, gentle touch. This idea of adding layers of color to create a darker effect, or a deeper color is a better way to put it, is really something that's great for the second graders to learn. It will overcome some of that desire that they have to get it right away, to draw as dark as they can. And by demonstrating it, you'll also be able to really show them that they can get quite a deep, beautiful color. But the more they're thinking about it ahead of time, the whole composition, by leaving some of those spaces, will also allow them to work back into it later. So the next thing to really work at is places where colors overlap, which is pretty frequent. I would tell my class a lot that in nature, it's very rare for us to see only one color. And so in our drawings, we would frequently want there to be very few, if any, places where only one color showed up. Rather, we would want lots of places where the colors overlap. And by drawing in that way with block crayons, it lets us choose later where our line may be. And so by adding this color in, we're creating a place where the two colors come together, but if we're doing it gently, at first it doesn't create a line. Eventually, by building that color up, we would be able to see where that line appears. And that would allow us to choose, for example, if it were a horizon or an area of a path or a river or whatever that was going to be. But we can shift it as we go if we're working slowly and carefully and building up colors. Now, when we're blending colors smoothly, again, it's a lot of passes. I do generally encourage my class to always do this from left to right, a single direction. Even left-handed students can be encouraged to push if they need to, but moving right to left and left in second grade, I really discouraged even for left-handed students because we really want them to develop that eye tracking habit for the muscles of their eyes to be bringing them left to right across the page. It really helps with language acquisition. So once they've gotten the smooth overlap of color, the creation of these different boundaries, then the next thing they can start to do is to work at finding how do we create a stronger form. And one way to do that is by pushing harder on one side of the crayon than we are on the other. And if you do that, if we're pushing down, for example, on the left side, but not the right, then we'll create this one edge. It's a little softer here, a little harder here. Now, often I would not do that for the very first thing that I were doing, but I do find that it can be really a help to students to talk about pushing harder on that outside edge to begin to make the area where the shading or the shadow will come in. Now, once they've gotten that and can begin to do that, they'll frequently not get it quite as dark as this, but as they work with it, they'll get better and better at it. So will you. Then we want to be able to do that in a way that doesn't always have a terminal edge here either. We don't always want that sharp edge. And so practicing as well with being able to start slowly and smoothly, but still pushing down into this and bringing it in slow. So starting, bringing it in slow. That lets us start to build up where there may be just a smaller area of shading. And so this can be a really good technique to practice. Also, practice turning the crayon. Turning the crayon while pushing on one outside edge is a great way to create a darker value along one side. And one thing I've really noted is that second graders really want their drawings to become more accurate. And so they love things like learning how to make it look like it has a little depth. Telling them which colors they might blend. So for example, using a purple on top of an orange to create a nice level of shadow, and using that same technique more than one time. Whether or not you're a great artist, the more you practice with these techniques, the more comfortable you will be in leading guided drawings, as well as in sharing some ideas for your class. Practicing drawing is something that didn't come very easily to me at the beginning, but I've found that it's something that I really enjoy doing with my class, mostly because they respond really well when they're able to do something nicely. They're so proud of what they can create. So I would generally also add value by layering colors and by adding multiple colors. Second graders and many adults often want to go right to black to add value, to add depth into their drawing, which is great. And I do use black very frequently for this. But I've found that it's really easy for the black block crayons to overwhelm the color that can be there, because the pigmentation in these particular crayons is a different value than what's in some of the others. And so I really like to build up to it to help them to kind of find how it can add, but while still leaving that lighter value of the color. You can certainly bring other colors back in over the top, and this is one of those areas that is a long-standing question in the Waldorf community about why you might avoid the use of this. I am very strongly in favor of using black crayons, using black block crayons with younger children to be able to really help them to develop a sense for color and value. It has great artistic merit. It will really be valuable to them in the future, and I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. So by helping them to build up these skills, pushing more on one side, sometimes pushing more on the other side, building these layers up of color, building in areas of depth and shadow, but really keeping it out of real perspective. You want to save the elements of technical drawing for a little bit later. Then they're creating what can become a really beautiful composition for them later. And they're learning that there's no defining edge. When there's an edge, they'll fill it in. When there's not, they can keep expanding something until they're happy with it. And I found that second graders can get really upset if what they start off by doing, whatever they started off wanting to do, isn't what winds up happening. Now at this point in a drawing, I might start to bring in some stick crayons to be able to help them to create a little bit more detail. I've really found that adding lines last is a great opportunity for second graders to have to really think about where those lines will go. And it also does help them to build up some skill in shading with stick crayons, which will be really valuable when they go into the upper grades and are doing a lot of drawing with pencil. And so giving them the opportunity to explore these kinds of techniques can be really helpful. I would just encourage you not to have too high of expectation. They will frequently turn to then drawing outlines, and that's okay. So the other thing that I would say in most block crayon drawings as a technique that's really good to do is to go back in, once the composition is kind of been established, to go back in and start to work on your background again by darkening the background and really filling it in, coming in once you have an idea of where all of your objects and figures and things in your drawing might be. It really lets the drawing gain an incredible amount of depth. If we can go back in and add in one color or maybe a few, that will really help that to stand out. So using those side strokes like we did at the very beginning, maybe a few places where I'm using a turning stroke or gliding the crayon around the edge. Those kinds of techniques really can be helpful to help the students to make a composition that isn't about working quickly and being done, but rather at the process of unfolding the image as they're going through it. And those students who really can get into spending time on their drawing, that same student who might have a hard time stopping every day in class, is often also the one who is really, really eager to learn those new techniques, new experiences. And what better way to give it to them than by sharing it with them in their drawings? So by this point, I would have likely been telling the class that they might find places on their own to work. I would likely encourage them to make sure that there aren't areas in their drawings where there's only one color. I think it's a great opportunity to say to your class that things that are too plain or too much the same really become quite dull and very boring. If they hear a teacher say that something is boring, it really speaks to them. And so I think it's a good opportunity to be able to build up more than one color. It's also a great opportunity with block crayons to break out of the idea that things have a color they should be. So for example, when drawing trees, I would frequently not begin with brown because once children draw a tree in brown, they generally don't think of it as being other colors. but by drawing a tree using multiple different colors, it helps them to gain a sense of the various colors that do occur in nature all around them. And it's also a more interesting composition. So I hope that you've had a chance to see some of these different techniques, work through what you might be trying on your own. I encourage you to keep experimenting with them, keep playing with what you're doing. There isn't one right way or anything wrong that you're going to likely do. So the more you're exploring, the more you're playing with them, the better your class will be able to have an experience of you guiding them at exploring the unknown. I hope you found it helpful, and I look forward to any questions you might have.